Tory parliamentary candidates are already trying to gain support to become the next leader of the Conservative Party.
Well, it comes amid fears from them that Sunak could face total election wipeout in 3 weeks.
Meanwhile, the Reform UK leader, Nigel Farage, demands to participate in a BBC election leaders debate after his party overtook the Tories in one opinion poll.
Well, Mr Farage then declared to be, well, as you will have heard yesterday, the official opposition, claiming a vote for the Conservatives should be thought of as a wasted vote. Let's talk to former Special Advisor to Michael Gove, Charlie Rowley. Good to see you this morning.
Morning.
First and foremost, the plotting in the Tory ranks to replace Rishi Sunak, well, I mean, it's all over bar the shouting, isn't it then? I mean, that's what these former members of the Cabinet are saying, in effect.
Well, I mean, look, the 4th of July is only a few weeks away, and if the polls are to be believed, then I would have thought every Conservative would be wanting to spend the next 3 weeks knocking on as many doors as they possibly can to ensure that they are returned. I mean, you can talk about all the plotting, or I wouldn't call it plotting, actually.
No, what appears to be happening is some prominent people, some prominent names are spending a lot of time messaging candidates, asking how they're getting on. And the conclusion from that is that you're trying to sort of get them on side, ready for a leadership campaign post-election.
Well, I mean, look, we'll just have to see how the election fares, first of all, because there isn't a vacancy. But, look, it's been a difficult campaign. It's been a difficult road for the Prime Minister. And, if there is a leadership election thereafter, you've got to then see, actually, what MPs or what Conservative MPs are left to take up that post.
Some of these major names are the very ones who are the most likely to lose their seats if things get very bad.
Yes, yeah. I mean, look, polling is, within the margin of error. But look, I'm sure Grant Shapps will be out on the doorsteps in Welling and Hatfield, making sure that he's doing all he can. People like Penny Mordaunt and others to make sure that they hold on to their seats. I'm sure now I've sort of given your producers a bit of a... they've now got to name all the candidates now, haven't they?
No,
I've named...
the constituency, so we're all right. We're all right, because the members of the Cabinet, so I think we're all right on that.
I apologise this morning.
But I'll tell you what I thought was quite interesting, reading some of the coverage this morning, with some senior insiders in the Conservative Party saying people like Suella Braverman, who, of course, has long been touted as a potential replacement for Rishi Sunak, described as a busted flush.
Well, I think, Suella, by her own admission, I think when she stopped becoming Home Secretary, had made some comments that she, and by her own admission, she doesn't always get the language right. And I'm sure that's probably burned a few bridges within the parliamentary party. But the key question is, after the 4th of July, what kind of party does the Conservative Party want to be? Now, I hear all the time that, the Conservative Party isn't conservative enough. And I sometimes struggle with that, because there's an ideology and there are basic principles such as, cutting taxes, getting grip with immigration, being the party of law and order, the party of the economy. Everybody stands for that. But it's also a party that's also been very successful in government because its ability to adapt. And I think when you start to see and start to hear sometimes the idea that, the right has to unite, so there has to be a deal, as Suella was asking for, as Jacob Rees-Mogg was asking for, a coalition of sorts between the Conservatives and Reform, isolating, in my view, which would be the vocal, the silent majority of mainstream, centre-ground Conservatives, where you actually sort of, pick up seats in the south, the south-east, the south-west. They are one-nationers. They are people that agree with all the things that I've just talked about at the start, but also have a liberal streak. They want to live and let live. I don't think anybody would call Boris Johnson right-wing. I don't think people would have called David Cameron right-wing.
Well,
these are people that won...
Yes,
Tory majorities.
They did, but there were constant complaints from many of the Tory faithful saying, we're no longer Tories. We don't feel this government is conservative enough. Would they be pleased in any way to see Nigel Farage being schmoozed? Because it's not just media speculation now. There are so many politicians actually talking about the very real possibility that there could be a Nigel Farage leadership of a newly formed Conservative Party.
And it's interesting headlines, and it makes for good chatter. But I mean, you know, well, look, you know, anything is possible in politics, so we'll have to wait and see. But I think, and again, it depends on how many Tory MPs might be left at the end of the election, who then they want to see as the leader. And look, you know, Boris is very charismatic, and maybe he's filled a void where actually, you know, the two main party leaders, the three main party leaders, 4 or 5, if you include the Greens and Plaid and the SNP, you know, Nigel has a fantastic ability to communicate with people, whether you agree with him, fundamentally disagree with him or not. He has an ability to articulate issues that he cares about, particularly Brexit. He's been talking about it for a very long time, particularly about immigration. He's been able to captivate people where maybe other politicians haven't been able to articulate the message as well as he has. But that's not the same thing, or that's not to say, therefore, he is the answer when there is a Conservative Party that is a broad church that caters to both people that, yes, have got strongly held views when it comes to Europe and immigration, but also you know, our liberal Conservatives, you know, that want deregulation, that, you know, have a light touch approach to things, that want social progress in many areas. You know, you've got to balance those two. And I think when you've spent your campaign, as Nigel has during this election, trashing the Conservative Party, wanting to destroy it in his view, it's very difficult to then see how you just welcome him with open arms, as David Cameron was saying this morning.
Well, it's interesting because we all talk about Nigel taking over the Conservative Party. I mean, whenever he's asked about it, he was asked about it yesterday. He just went, boring. No, the Conservatives are finished. I don't want anything to do with the Conservatives. So he dismisses it. And it'd be very hard for him to go back on that word. Meantime, talking of Nigel Farage, what do you make of this move now that he says he should be in the next leaders' debate?
Well, there are two views that I have. From a media perspective, from a viewer's perspective, I think it would be box office. I think it'd actually be very interesting to see him debating the two party leaders. I mean, I think he was 2016. He debated with Nick Clegg, I think, on when it came to Brexit. You know, but he's playing to his strengths. He's a great communicator.
But in terms of, I mean, I know the polls. That's one poll put him ahead of the Conservatives, but nevertheless, a lot of polls put him, you know, nipping at the heels. So in that sense, if as many people are interested in what he's got to say as are interested in the Conservative Party, shouldn't he have a platform?
Well, you're right to say it's only one poll, and the polls are always within, you know, a couple of points margin of error. So it may not be the case that Reform are ahead of the Tories, but we'll see when other polls come out. But he's not going to be, Reform are not going to be the official opposition. They know that by their own admission. They're not going to pick up the numbers of seats to be, you know, His Majesty's opposition in Parliament. So, you know, there's only going to be one person that's going to be Prime Minister. It's either going to be Rishi Sunak or Sir Keir Starmer. So, you know, I think it's probably still worthwhile within the BBC's right to allow a debate to take place between those two main party leaders. And I think if you include Nigel Farage in that, when he's going to probably get less, well, he will get less seats than the Liberal Democrats, for example, then you would have to include Ed Davey, I would have thought, on that. And then that distills, I think, what Nigel really wants, which is to be the...
Well, he really wants a head-to-head with Starmer. That's the real debate he wants.
And I just don't think that's something that broadcasters would be able to justify.
Well, I don't know. I think you could justify it. It's just whether... I mean, on those terms, whether Keir Starmer would agree to it. This is the problem. You need to get the political parties to agree to it.
And Rishi Sunak would protest as well.
He'd never agree to it.
No.
Yes, yeah. And that's the thing. We don't have in the US, we don't have a sort of committee that deals with presidential debates and sets them up and they work out the rules between them. It's still quite fairly new in the UK for debates between party leaders. So you're right, you'd have to sign up to it, and I don't think Sir Keir would.
But isn't it interesting, just in the few weeks... how many weeks have we been at this? 3.5, really. Just in those 3.5 weeks when we were sort of saying, it's all getting a bit dull, isn't it? Suddenly, things can turn on a sixpence, can't they?
They can. And I think, look, you know, we're seeing in the last couple of days, you know, you've seen, you know, I've talked about him a couple of times now, but, you know, Lord David Cameron, you know, he's been out and about, he's been sort of, you know, doing the media rounds, he's taking the fight to Nigel, I think, in some of the papers this morning. You know, is there a way in which, in the next couple of weeks, you actually see Boris Johnson enter the campaign trail and, you know, encourage voters, people that voted for him in 2019, the reasons why they should maybe stay with the Conservative Party and not be tempted by reform.
He's done a huge column in the Mail today saying exactly that.
Ah, well, there you are. He's ahead of me, and I should read that before the next interview. But exactly, who am I? But I think, you know, if he did make a couple of weeks ago, I think also he did a takedown column on Sir Keir Starmer. But to see him on people's televisions, I think, you know, Boris Johnson on the campaign trail, you know, giving a speech speech, giving a rally somewhere. I think people who still have a lot of love and affection for Boris, who might be tempted because they think, also another person that was big, charismatic, great orator. If you're tempted by another great big character such as Nigel Farage, don't be tempted by that. Don't leave the Conservatives going to vote for reform. I think Boris could be someone that would be able to tempt back the party faithful and grassroots Conservatives who the Prime Minister and the Conservative Party could do with right now.
OK, Charlie, thank you. You've not impressed Peter Lee.
Oh, no.
Who's been in touch, who says, yet somebody else saying Nigel will only get a few seats. Why can't these people see the truth? But it's not to say the Reform Party won't get a lot of votes. It's how it translates into seats in this current system. And that is... I've not really been an advocate of PR before, but when you
can start to see the unfairness of our system.
But when you look at it now under that poll yesterday, where Reform had 19% of the vote and the Tories had 18% of the vote, the Tories were getting something like 70 seats and Reform were getting 5. That's how it translates into the seats. So Charlie's not wrong, actually. It's just the system doesn't represent it in the way.
But you'll never get a government that will vote in PR, that will allow a vote on PR, because that's asking Turkeys to vote for Christmas, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it did. Well, except under the current circumstances, of course, Labour would still do very well.
Yes.
So perhaps...
No, but they're not going to. It's an easier win, the two-party first-past-the-post system, isn't it?
Yeah. But anyway, so get your point, but it's just how the system works. Anyway, Charlie, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.